You're listening to the Youth for Life podcast with Michelle Baum, Director of Y4Life at Lutherans for Life, where we prepare youth to be gospel-motivated voices for life. Be sure to stick around after today's live recording of our Chats for Life program to find out how you can be live too on our next Youth for Life podcast. Good evening and welcome to Chats for Life. We are so glad that you're here tonight to hear, or if you're listening on the podcast, whatever time it is, we thank you for joining us. This podcast, this episode of Chats for Life is going to be a special one. It's a What's on the Table, which we started doing this summer, and they seem to be pretty popular. So I have some guests with me tonight that will be speaking on different topics, articles that are in the news right now. With me is my assistant, Corey. Of course, I'm Michelle, the director of Y4Life. And then we have Emma and Anna. And in just a moment, I'm going to have them introduce themselves. But what I want to do is start off with prayer, and then we'll jump over and have them introduce themselves and the articles that they have. So please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for this day and for this night. We thank you for the opportunity to talk about life issues, to learn about life issues so that we might be ready to uphold lives. We thank you so much for the gift of the podcast, the gift of our listeners. And in particular tonight, Lord, I thank you for our college leaders on campus who are motivated to express the truth about life in a gospel-motivated way, giving glory to you and a reminder that all life is precious, not because of our abilities, but because of what you have done in our lives. We thank you for all of these things, and we ask that you be with us tonight during this episode. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, Emma, I'm going to have you jump in first. Go ahead and give us a brief introduction, and then Anna, you can jump in right after her.
Alrighty, well, hi, my name is Emma Van Tol. I'm from Michigan, but I go to Concordia University Nebraska, and I am the president of Bulldogs for Life, the pro-life group here on campus. The article I have for us today is titled, Right to Life Sues to Block Michigan Abortion Rights Law. Alrighty, so Michigan is a very pro-choice state. After the Dobbs decision was made, they decided to start a petition called Proposal 3 to make abortion pretty much constitutional in Michigan, and that did pass. Last week, they had a state march on the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Proposal 3, and so I wanted to kind of discuss the pros and cons of marching in our states compared to marching in like Washington, D.C. and stuff like we will in January.
Right. So you have a series of questions for us to kind of, you sent a few questions to us to think about. And if you want to go ahead and pose a couple of them, while you're picking those questions, let's go ahead and have Anna introduce herself, because I'm sure she's going to jump in on some of these answers, and that way people will be able to connect her voice with her name. Go ahead, Anna.
Hi, my name is Anna. I am from Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm currently a student at Concordia, Wisconsin. And I've been involved in the pro-life movement for about 6 or 7 years, and I enjoy traveling and speaking on the issue. I really enjoy public speaking. So that's kind of what I do in my free time.
Yeah. Thanks so much again, Emma and Anna, for joining us tonight. We have some other guests too, and you guys are welcome to jump in to help us answer some of these questions if you feel so moved. All right, Emma, start us off. What's your first question?
Is it even worth marching in Washington, D.C. if the right is in the states right now?
Yeah,
that's kind of my first one.
It's something a lot of people in the life movement have kind of thought about, right? Should we continue to march in DC? Should we just march in the states? Okay, I'm not gonna jump in on the answer what I think. What do you think, Anna?
Well, I think that after the Dobbs decision, obviously, like you said, Michelle, there's been a lot of discussion about this, but I think it's important to remember that the US representatives that we elect are also in Washington, D.C., who inform our state decisions. So I think seeing the connection there, that D.C. is the place where all 50 states can get together and plan and strategize and then go back to their states more energized. I think that's one way to look at it. But on another point, as we're kind of going into the next presidential cycle, there's been talk about, should the president even have a plan for this? Because it's a state's issue now. But I kind of like to say that it's both. I know the Dobbs decision is very clear that it goes back directly to the states, but I think every person running for federal office should have a federal plan on how to protect life. So whether that's having a mandated abortion and reporting law, which we don't have right now, we don't actually know how many abortions happen in the United States, or saying that no, infanticide can't happen. We know that federal positions can say that murder is wrong. So I think that's kind of a unique idea, is we can reframe who's in charge of what, and maybe there are some things that we can ask the president to do to protect life.
Yeah, excellent. I would agree. Like, both places are important, right? I don't know if Corey, if you or Emma want to jump in on this one, feel free if you do. But again, yeah, both are important, right? Definitely it's gone to the states and we need to have our voice represented there. But our representatives are also in Washington, D.C. And it's important for Washington, D.C. to see public opinion, right? They're so far removed so often from the average individual, the person who lives in Southern Indiana or in Kentucky or in Tennessee or in Michigan or any place, right? And so it's important for our voice and our presence in Washington, D.C., even as it is important in the states. So really, I mean, the Dobbs overturning Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs case, was wonderful. And yet it did create more work for people who are in the life industry or the life ministry, right? Who are supporting life. So.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same that you did, that, we elect our representatives in DC just like we elect our state and local representatives. So yes, states' rights and getting that taken care of in terms of abortion laws in our own states, but there still needs to be some continuation of that in Washington, D.C. Like Anna said, making sure that we have laws on the books that are going to continue to protect life. Infanticide is one that we've seen is becoming more and more normalized, unfortunately. And I think, yeah, we still need to go to our representatives in Washington, D.C. and say, hey, that's not okay. And we're not okay with this. And we need to just remind them of that. And if that means we march in DC every year, then we march in DC every year, just like we march in our states every year.
Yeah, I think it's good to have the all-around supporting both our federal government leaders and our state government. I had found a study, more of a journal of health politics, policy, and law, and they had found that the state legislatures are set up quite a bit different most of the time than the federal. So they're a lot closer to their constituents. How to practice that word. So they can work more closely, get the opinions of the people, and they don't have to. They can really get what the people want better than federal most of the time. So I think it's important to support both.
Now, I know you had a question about groups, how we can maybe support groups that are trying to continue to help with pro-life legislation, right? And fight or defeat pro-abortion legislation in the legal system. Emma, do you have ideas as to how we might support groups that are trying to do that?
One thing I thought of first off is to make sure they're gospel motivated. Not that the ones that aren't gospel motivated are bad, but it's definitely, as Christians, I think it's important that we support the gospel motivated voices for life. And I think probably we can just join their efforts if we have the time, support them monetarily, or join them, because the more people that come forward as pro-life, the bigger impact we can have.
Yeah,
it just shows that a lot of people care about the issue.
Right. Other thoughts?
I think there's a hesitancy sometimes if you live in a state that is pro-abortion, not to reach out to your legislators because, oh, they've already made up their mind. And while that may be true and maybe you'll never change their mind, I don't know if that's necessarily always our goal is to change the legislator's mind, but to make it known in the community and in the culture surrounding that when you make your voice heard, other people feel impacted to make their voice heard. And like, I think living in DC over the summer, I noticed how even a Capitol Hill staffer, even if they receive a message from someone who disagrees with them, they still pass it on to their boss. And I think that's really important. So even if you live in Michigan or California or New York, still not growing weary, not growing tired of, constantly having to say, don't kill babies after 9 months. I mean, it's exhausting that we even have to say that. But I think that's what we're called to do as Christians. And regardless of the circumstances, whether we're in the fire or out of the fire, keeping that consistent pro-life messaging, regardless of where we live.
Yeah, and I think that discussion is important, right? Not just contacting our legislators, but making it known in our community where we stand, right? At the community level, in our families, in our churches. The more that we make abortion a topic that we can speak about, right? Rather than something that nobody wants to touch because it's so controversial. But the more that we can show, again, Emma, you mentioned the gospel motivated approach to life. The more that we can show that the reason that we're in this is because we love, because we care for people, we care for women, we care for children, we care for fathers, for men. And we know that abortion creates harm in every instance, right? Whether it's to the baby or to the mom or to the dad or to the family as a whole. The more that we speak about it, the more we have an opportunity to change public opinion. And public opinion does change laws. And it affects laws, right? We see this in the history of America. Public opinion changes from time to time, and we have massive sweeps and changes in legislation. So I think talking about it, not making it a topic that is off limits is important, but also as a Christian, praying, right? God answers prayers. He hears prayers, and he waits on us to ask for the gifts that he desires to give. And I think very often as Christians, we get overwhelmed by this inevitable or like this large mammoth type of issue, right? It's like I just gave a presentation today where I talked about it as a Goliath issue. When we talk about David and Goliath, abortion is a Goliath issue, right? And yet God provided for David, for his people, and David was able to do what was necessary. And I think God does give Christians the ability to change minds and to change hearts.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's often a debate on whether politics is downstream from culture or culture is downstream from politics. And honestly, I just kind of think of them as a pool, like they're in a pool together. But I even like, this is not as serious of an example, but even when we think about something like cigarettes are fully legal and they have been legal for a really long time, but now people recognize the harm of it and they're not buying them as much, and people are smoking less in the United States than they ever have before. And yeah, we stopped advertisements on TV about them and we tax them higher, but there's no advertisements on TV about abortion. So I think that recognizing that culture does have weight in impacting politics can cause us to not have those kind of weary feelings all the time, that there's multiple avenues to be pro-life.
Right.
I guess the other thing
the
other thing I was thinking with that too is like the abortion conversation can be uncomfortable, but maybe that's, how the Holy Spirit is working through you to share the message that life is precious and life is valuable. And, if the person you're talking to is uncomfortable, then maybe that's the Holy Spirit working in their heart to help them realize that life is valuable from the beginning, and that we need to continue to support and uphold life, no matter what stage.
Yeah. What other questions do you have, Emma?
I was just curious, how you find out where marches are happening in your state. I know that Lutherans for Life and Y4Life does post some, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for pointing that out. We do try to keep up to date with it. So if you follow our Instagram page, we do announce when we find out, right, where those marches are. But to my knowledge, there's no specific place that you can find the marches for every single state, right? And it'd be really great if there was. I did a little research. The March for Life webpage, they do have some state marches. They'll tell you where they're going to be, but it's usually, again, in states that are probably going to be, that aren't already pro-life, right? They're going to have go to, especially to those states where maybe it's borderline, or it's very much embraced this culture of death. So, you know, some of the states out east, obviously California, Nevada, those areas, Colorado. So again, there's not, unless any of you know, any one specific site we can go to.
The only thing I could think of was to maybe like get connected with like your state's Right to Life group, because they're often a lot larger than like the state Lutherans for Life branch, for instance, you know, or do
Right.
both, you know, get their emails and stuff like that. They would probably have that information be sent out.
Right. And I think, you know, a quick Google, right? Where is the, state March for Life in whatever state, right? Probably is going to give you some good facts.
And if you don't find it, it's possible that they don't have one. I know Tennessee does not have a March for Life, so it's possible they don't have one. You could start one. I've tried that in the past. It's actually kind of difficult to get streets and roads shut down. So
that's really interesting. I didn't know Tennessee didn't have one.
Yeah, a lot of the southern states, I think honestly part of it is a lot of the pro-life groups sometimes don't agree with each other, and so there's a lack of organization. And then if you don't have abortion legal in your state, sometimes it's not as much of a sense of urgency to have a protest. So
sure. We probably have time for one more question on your article, Emma, before we move to Anna's. Do you have a final question you want us to debate or to talk about?
I do have one, although I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think it's worth bringing up. Kind of the idea of, or the question of, did Dobbs versus Jackson actually make the abortion state of our country worse? And I would argue yes and no, because since abortion is not since it's into the state's hands, now both the pro-choice and the pro-life movements have a lot more power. Because even Roe v. Wade had some limitations onto when abortion could go up to. Now those are gone. So the pro-choice people can go as far as they want. But at the same time, us as pro-life people, we can make our voices heard.
Yeah, I think when, I think I'd say that overturning Roe v. Wade didn't make abortion worse. I think when we look at the fact that Texas, the Heartbeat Act saved over 10,000 babies in 9 months. There are lots more lives that are being saved. I think what it did do, and I think this is is it did bring abortion to the forefront of social concerns, right? In every state.
Yeah, and since I'm from Michigan, I'm hearing a lot of Michigan stuff right now, and then Ohio, they also are having the same issue. So I guess like right now, there's just a lot of, and plus the media isn't going to cover as much all the states that are doing pro-life things unless there's some big uproar. So what we're seeing is it's appearing that it's.
Yeah, it certainly has motivated and activated those who are pro-choice, for sure, right? They're excellent writers. They have a lot of funding. They're writing bills and they're sending in money to really persuade people, and they're writing it in ways that seem compassionate, right? They're writing bills that look like they're bills that are good for women. And maybe where the For Life voices are failing is expressing how those are not good for women, right? Putting as much effort into explaining what's really happening in those bills and finding the money to fund that campaign. Because again, the amount of money that flowed into Ohio just in the last month was just astounding. And the same thing happened in Michigan a year ago, right? Before Proposition 3. And you know, the fundraising efforts, perhaps that is, we're seeing that maybe we're not doing all that we can there. Other thoughts?
I think legislators have been trained, like especially Republican legislators for the last 50 years have been trained to not speak about abortion. And now everyone is looking to them to speak about abortion and they don't know how. And that happened in Ohio. We barely saw any Ohio legislators. I mean, I knew a few state legislators that were speaking out, but they were being chastised by their own party. So I think a lot of this has to do with party politics, of recognizing that the pro-life generation isn't your granddad's Republican Party, and it's necessary that we use messaging that is empowering to women, but also empowering to their children. So I think Roe v. Wade being reversed is the best thing that happened in 50 years. And if I knew that we were going to lose 10 election cycles to get this, I would do it again, because it was a stain that made it so that even in states like Tennessee, where we had conservative and pro-life legislators, when we passed pro-life legislation, Planned Parenthood and the ACLU sued us within maybe 2 hours because of Roe v. Wade. So now we have the freedom to protect life. And I think that's kind of, we have to get down to the heart of what America is. It's like we have the freedom to protect good things. And so we're going to continue the work that we did before Roe v. Wade, which we were working in the states before Roe v. Wade. And I don't think necessarily the media understands that either. Like, we have plans for these states, but sometimes plans take longer than we want them to be.
Yep. And in the meantime, those heartbeat bills, they are saving lives, right? And even when they're challenged, they're still saving lives. And then we get a chance to rejoice, right? So in Indiana, our bill was under trial as well, and finally it made it through the system and it has passed. And so we see some really positive things in some states as well. But you're right, there are some states where there's a lot of discouragement right now. And as For Life people, we can reach out to them and encourage and pray for and continue to promote that truth that every life is valuable, right?
Yeah, I'm by no means trying to discredit the positive outcomes of Dobbs versus Jackson. It just seems like there's lots going on now that it has been passed.
Yeah.
But also shows why it's important to get back in your states and show your voice. So.
Yeah, and you're not alone, Emma. I mean, we have on even our LFL staff, we have people who live in states where worse bills have been passed now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, right? And so that's discouraging, and it's hard to see, but we know that victory, that triumph, is short-lived. It's not going to be forever, and we already know the victory has been won, and we have that hope, that message to share with others. So yeah, I'm so glad you brought that one up, because I think it is, a lot of For Life people are very discouraged right now, especially after the last couple of election cycles. So all right, well, we're going to move on to our next article. Anna, you want to share it with us and kind of give us a rundown?
Sure. So my article is kind of weird. The headline says, first IVF baby born in the UK with DNA from 3 parents in major trial to avoid defective genes. So when I read this, I was thinking, like, this is kind of dystopian. Like, I don't necessarily think that I ever thought that this would happen, but it did. So now we have to address it from a For Life perspective. And the first line of the article says, the controversial trial of mitochondrial donation treatment has proven a success in the UK, preventing a newborn baby from inheriting defective genes. So you read that, you're thinking, okay, well, that's good. A baby doesn't have a terminal illness now. Who would be against this? We're helping a baby live. Then you kind of go further down the article and it says, an IVF baby created from the DNA of 3 separate people has been born in the UK, as scientists try to tackle the passing on of defective genes carried in the mother's mitochondria. The baby was born to 1 genetic father and 2 genetic mothers, after researchers at the Newcastle Fertility Center were granted permission to trial the controversial procedure back in 2017. So this has been years of this trial. So you have to think about how many times did they have to try this? How many lives were lost in this process? The first baby to be born from this donation treatment was in Mexico in 2016, and the syndrome that they're trying to combat is Leigh syndrome, which is a rare neurometabolic disorder that affects the central nervous system, and it's often fatal, but it's not always fatal. So I have a few questions about this. First question I can just answer because it's pretty simple, just laying the foundation of what is IVF, because it's used a lot for a lot of different procedures, and it kind of does encapsulate a lot of different scenarios of pregnancy. So the Mayo Clinic says that IVF is an egg that's fertilized by injecting a single sperm into the egg or mixing the egg with sperm in a petri dish. The fertilized egg, called an embryo, is transferred into the uterus. So this is often done through some sort of procedure. In vitro fertilization, also called IVF, is a complex series of procedures that can lead to pregnancy. Sperm can come from the husband, or it can come from a donor, or the eggs could come from the wife, or they could come from a donor. And the embryo might be implanted in the wife's womb or the womb of a gestational surrogate. So there's a lot of ways that people use IVF. And so it's something that not a lot of people talk about because it's private and it's kind of weird to just casually have a conversation or a cup of coffee with someone and say, so how did you conceive your baby? That doesn't typically come up. And so it's something that Christians don't necessarily know how to talk about without making it uncomfortable, or almost every single person on this chat probably knows someone that was conceived from IVF. So how do we talk about this? How do we talk about medical experimentation? And where is the line for Christians? So the first question is, what is the Christian ethical stance on IVF? And is there a Christian ethical stance on IVF right now?
Yeah, and even before we answer that question, let's just make it very clear, right? Even though that science, that website mentioned that it was a fertilized egg, and called the new life a fertilized egg, we would say as Christians, that's not a fertilized egg, that's a human being, right? So even when science uses words that are scientific, let's be real and say this is what is it really? It's a human being, right? When an egg and a sperm come together, we have a new person. So your question is, repeat it for us real quick.
What is the Christian ethical stance on IVF, if there is one?
Yeah. Okay, I see some pauses, so I'm going to jump in a little bit and get some time to think. So we do have a variety of stances, right, on IVF, and because IVF is so complex. So I think what we have to recognize first is that the desire for children is a godly desire, right? We recognize that it's a godly desire. We also can say wholeheartedly that no child is conceived without sin. No parent desires children without sinning in some way to desire them, right? Whether it's like, oh, I really want a little me, right? Or I really want someone to teach football to, or, those sorts of things. Those are good desires. And yet there is no perfect parent that has a perfect desire for children, right? Or doesn't get frustrated by the fact that the child's not coming when they want that child to come, or those sorts of things. So I think we have to recognize that the world is filled with sin, right? And that doesn't justify certain actions, but we also don't want to set up a dichotomy that says, well, parents that conceive in this way, they do it sinlessly, right? Because that's just not true, right? But I think when we look at IVF, you have a really good question, right? How far is too far? And I think the partner question to that is, are we guaranteed children, right? Like who gives children? Who creates children? And as Christians, we can say confidently that God creates children, right? That God brings children to life, that he combines sperm and egg to create human life. If that happens in a petri dish, we still say that human life is valuable, right? If that happens in a mother's womb through sexual intercourse, we say that child's valuable. If that happens because of rape, we still say that child is valuable, right? So even in this discussion, we don't want to belittle or maybe to devalue life, no matter how it was conceived, right? But you, in your introduction, Anna, you gave us a number of scenarios that create ethical issues, right? Like donor for sperm, or a donor for the egg, or a surrogate. All of those ethical issues separate us from the way God intended oneness to happen, right? So that marital oneness between man and woman, this giving of self in love, is supposed to beget life. And there are some things that remove us from that marital act. And IVF is certainly one of them, right? So foundationally, Christians have to say, this wasn't how God desired life to come to be, right? We can at least start there. I think there's more that I could say here, but I want to let other people jump in. What other thoughts do you guys have?
I just think of the ethics of it too, of children thrive best when it's their biological mother and father that they're living with. And like you brought up, Michelle, sometimes donors are used for varieties of reasons, whether it's a single person wanting to have children without the need for a spouse, or maybe the mother's eggs aren't good, or the father's sperm isn't good, things like that. You see a lot of instances where people use donors for those reasons. And we see that while you can still feel a connection to that child biologically, there still isn't going to be the same connection as if it was 100% from the mother or father. And so I think that's something to consider as well, is that, God gives us the gift of mother and father for a reason, and not to discredit the impact that an adoptive or a foster parent can have on a child. But we see time and time again, the best scenario for families is biological mother, biological father, biological child. That's how God intended it to be, and that's how we are wired. And so I think there are some ethical issues purely from a donor standpoint with that, and along with some other just moral issues that come with it, where again you're grading people based on qualities, along with those ethical issues as well. So
yeah, when you talk about the grading, you're talking about an act that happens during IVF, right? So when we talk about bringing life to be, that act, the sexual intimacy that happens between a man and woman, is supposed to be an act of service and love, right? But the act that happens in IVF often doesn't result in life, but it actually results in death, right? So when first of all, multiple embryos are created, multiple human beings are created, right? Multiple eggs are harvested, multiple sperm, and then they're put together, and those embryos are then graded on a scale based on how they are developing in that petri dish. And if they are not developing quickly enough or in the way that they should be, according to the scientists, right, they are discarded. And those are human lives that are being discarded, right? So that's the grading that you're talking about. And it's a grading where we're giving the power of a scientist, right? Or a type of doctor to make the decision as to which life qualifies to continue living, right? And that should cause us concern. Great.
Yeah, it's almost is like taking God out of the picture. It's humans trying to do what they want and not letting God choose. I mean, in a normal situation, when parents have sex, it's not going to, if the embryo or the baby is not healthy, the body will automatically, for the most part, take care of that, and it just will not become full term. Like, the body, God created our bodies to take care of those things to a point. I mean, sure, there's still, chromosomal problems like Down syndrome or something like that. That's a different situation, but our bodies know how to take care of those things. And I mean, even the instance of twins or triplets or all those kinds of things, because IVF can sometimes create that problem too, because they introduce or they implant multiple embryos and then they all take, and they're like, oh, well, now we have a lot of babies in the mother, and that's not healthy either for her. So in the real world, well, I keep saying the real world, in a normal situation, that's just not how it works. So we're just really taking God out of the picture and making it kind of what we think is ideal, but it's not Christian.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you brought up, because I remember in high school, I looked around my classroom and I saw almost half of the people in my class were twins. And I don't know if that was just something crazy, but statistically, that's impossible for that to happen. And then I found, after talking to some of them were conceived through IVF. So it makes sense. We're actually changing kind of the way that families look because of this. And yeah, I mean, I have friends that were conceived through IVF, and so it's not something that we want to say, flippant phrases about, or everyone who does that is, careless, because that's not the reality. But I was kind of thinking through this philosophically, kind of breaking it down, and, just for some statistics, a pregnancy created by a husband and wife has a 10 to 20% chance of miscarriage. So miscarriage can happen regardless of scientific interruption or not. IVF doubles that to 20 to 40%. And so if we are looking at, okay, life begins at conception, when should life be protected? At that moment that it's created. And does the intentional process of IVF have a higher rate of failure? Yes. Does that failure mean a child dies? Yes. So that's why we're supposed to proceed with caution, not because we don't want people to have children, because this is something that needs to be talked about. And if you look at IVF, or even just look at this headline, that this child now has 2 moms and 1 dad because of scientific discovery, we can see how something with good intentions can become a very slippery slope very quickly. And now we're getting into designer babies and really, really scary, almost eugenics type of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And again, that intention was good, right? It was to alleviate suffering, to prevent a type of disease, which is wonderful. We do want to prevent diseases when we can, and we do want to alleviate suffering. But you're right, Anna, it opens the door to things that are that can lead to unethical behavior. And again, it does create difficulties for that child. That child should have a relationship with both mother and father, and now has another mother, right? And so how do you again, how does this child now has to deal with that, right? It was a life that was created, a life that is loved, a life that has been redeemed by Jesus, but also a life that now has a uniqueness to it that others don't, right? And maybe some confusion with that. I think you've got some other, ethical issues too, and you mentioned it, Emma and Anna both. The propensity for multiple children is much higher with IVF because they're not just going to implant one embryo, but allow for a number of embryos to be implanted. And then if there's a number of embryos, then the couple has to make a decision. Do they, again, these are in medical terms, harvest some of those embryos, right, to decrease the likelihood of preterm delivery. And so then we have another instance where lives are potentially lost because for the safety of one or two children, other children are removed. So lots and lots and lots of ethical issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Emma.
I kind of wonder if we're hurting ourselves using the term embryo instead of like baby. I don't wonder. I know we are, because when you take that word out, people don't care as much. There's a YouTuber I used to follow until they got pregnant and started calling their baby an embryo, and I was like, hold up, I can't support this anymore because it's a baby. You don't understand. Like this is valuable life that you're talking about here, not just a thing.
Right.
And yeah, I think that could help. It would change the whole movement if we could change the vocabulary of it.
Yeah, I think the reason they do that is because it's a scientific term. So it's, this is the stage of development that baby's in. But I think scientism has kind of divorced baby and human from these terms. Fetus is Latin for offspring. So we normally hear these terms and automatically think person. But because of this kind of like progressive scientific discovery dystopian movement, it's kind of divorced a lot of these terms from their actual definition. I have one more question. I guess, well, first I'll just mention, if we're going to connect this to the Bible, barrenness is mentioned in the Bible over and over and over again, often more than pregnancy. And so to expect that every single woman is going to be perfectly fertile and have as many children as she wants is not historical, and it's not biblical. And so a lot of these women, they were heartbroken and they cried out to God and they took their troubles to God. And so that should be our first advice to people when they come to us saying, I want to conceive children and I'm having trouble. Go to God first before you kind of try out some experimental methods that could lead you to potential heartache. They really could lead you to potential heartache. So what are some ethical alternatives to IVF? If you want to have children, but IVF is not the path for you, what do you think that families should do?
I think you nailed it by, starting with God, right? Sometimes, and this is hard, sometimes God does say no, right? Or sometimes he says not yet. And so we trust in him no matter what. And yet that doesn't prevent us from having doctors explore. Maybe there are other things that are preventing that pregnancy, right? Things that would be easily fixed, like a closed fallopian tube or an area of scarring. NAPRO technology is fairly new. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that is like this work toward using the body's natural systems, right? Keeping track of what's going on in a woman's body and really trying to work with the body for that pregnancy to happen. And sometimes there are minor surgeries that can be done to remove a section of endometriosis or to fix a portion of a fallopian tube that has been closed off, right? There are some things, God does give us medicine to uphold and support life. And so maybe some of those things would work, right? And they don't take away or they don't replace the oneness that happens between a man and a woman to bring forth this child in love. And so that might be something, right? Going to a specialist on hormones, right? So they can track what's really happening and maybe work with the body to help a pregnancy come to be. But I think, again, sometimes the answer is no. And learning, again, how to rest with peace, to have that peace with God, and to find perhaps joy in your nieces and nephews, perhaps adoption or fostering, right? These are ways that we can still love children and care for children, right?
Yeah. I was going to jump in and say too, I know that there's an author who's Lutheran who has talked about how she and her husband have struggled with barrenness and that God hasn't given them their own children, but she often talks about how she gets to love on her baptism, like her godchildren, those that she sponsors in baptism, and how important it is to continue to pray for those children in your life and be with those children in the same way that you would be with your own, not taking the role of mother and father, but continuing to encourage and uphold them in the same way that their mother and father are doing.
TJ, it looks like TJ has something.
I also feel like the person who is pro-choice needs to be approached that differently, because we have this picture of the perfect human, and we're trying all this experimentation to get the perfect human. The human being, right before we wake up, after we wake up and before we talk to anyone, our first thought in our head is us. We're selfish without even trying to be. Like, what am I going to do today? What am I going to eat? What am I going to wear? Okay. But while we're doing this, everyone around us is disabilitied except me, because it's almost like we're all different people. And if I'm not the perfect human, usually people will pinpoint a perfect human to idolize, like a celebrity. But the qualifications of life from a pro-choice standpoint is the perfect human, which is, the confident human, the really smart human, the, attractive person that we idolize that really doesn't exist. Does anyone fall in this standpoint? No. If their parents were pro-choice, they wouldn't be here. No one fits this perfect human figure except God, really. It's almost like he's the answer. Crazy.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, when we're talking about technology that can perfect, you're right. There is no perfect person. And just God in flesh is the perfect man, right? So you're right, TJ.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say one more thing before we move on. I initially posed the question, I think we already answered, are biological children a right or are they a gift? And obviously they're a gift. They're authored by God. They're not promised in scripture, but neither is marriage. Neither is perfect friendship. Neither is a family that gets along. And so we often have these really big expectations and not a lot of patience. And the phrase that has been used since 1972 with Roe v. Wade is abortion on demand. But now we're switching that to children on demand with the qualities that we want on demand. And if not, get rid of them. That's kind of the message that a lot of people are told, and you can pay more to get a child that you want. It's like the scientific community has looked at these children as commodities, and you see in Hollywood that people are paying the price for this. So our role as Y4Life people is to say that life is indispensable and it doesn't have a price. God is the one that paid for us, so we don't need to put a price on it. It's not our place to even put a price tag on anyone. And so the more that we can do as a movement to make people not commodities and make people people and recognize their humanity. We recognize their humanity by recognizing their creator. I think that's the solution to this. So it's not necessarily to, condemn people that support IDF, but rather to point to a better option of looking at people as a gift and a miracle and a 1 in a million, and not something created in a petri dish.
Yep, absolutely. It's a great way to end. Corey, do you want to share your article?
I can. It might be a short story to discuss, but I think it's a good one to talk about, just with the conversation of children that we've been having. So I took a very different route, and I'm not talking about anything ethically, or along the lines of abortion. I want to talk more about family. And the story I found is actually from Business Insider, and it's in their economy section, but I think it's one that not a lot of people are talking about. So I'm glad someone decided they needed to write a story on it. The headline says almost 90% of Americans think families should have multiple children, but it's increasingly expensive to raise a child. And so what the author of this article did was he looked at some of the most recent Gallup surveys and results that have been conducted, and saw that most Americans think the ideal family consists of more than one child. Let me find the exact statistics here. So the poll was conducted with over 2,000 US adults 18 and up. 89% of respondents feel that the ideal family has 2 or more children, and just 3% of respondents said the ideal number of children is 1. So when you look at that, you have 92% of respondents saying that a family should have children. And so the breakdown says 44% of respondents said 2 children was ideal, 29% say 3, 12% say 4, and 2% say 5, and 2% say 6 or more children. So, I mean, just looking at that, we see that there is a desire for large families in America today. But the other thing the author of this article said is that the average cost per year to raise a child is $21,000, and that's why he's posing the hypothesis that that's why people aren't having as many children. And so I wanted to address that, and as for life people talk about what are the reasons that we should or should not have children. And so I guess the first question is, were the results of this survey surprising to you, and why or why not?
They were not surprising to me. We've been talking about this in one of my classes, and there's a single child in my class, and she just talks about how it's lonely, or she has a lot of pressure on her from her parents. And so for that reason, I think a lot of people recognize that, and so that's why there's a want for at least 2 kids, so that they have someone to grow up with and a companion and to play with and things like that. So that really did not surprise me at all.
Yeah, I remember my dad saying when he grew up, he knew a family, and he grew up in Florida, and he said in his neighborhood there was a family with 3 kids, and that was like a big deal. 3 or 4 kids was a big deal. And now I know families that have 10 kids or 11 kids. I know that's not necessarily a recent trend, but I think there was something with kind of the boomers, like this generation of latchkey kids, where there was like 2 kids who would come home from school and parents were both working. And now we're recognizing that's not necessarily always fulfilling for every type of woman. And sometimes men like to be at home a little more than usual too. And so that gives you more time with your children. So we're not necessarily viewing like children as necessarily as an inconvenience, or we have to get a childcare, all these things. There's more flexible ways, I think, to raise children now than there were in the past.
I wasn't surprised either, but I actually don't think that money really has a lot to do with the decision. I mean, I do know for some people it does, but honestly, I think we are more motivated by convenience, right? Things are made for families of 4. It's when we have one parent per child, right? You start to bring in that third child or that fourth child or fifth child, and you've got more work and less freedom as a mom or a dad to do the things that you want to do, right? And I know that portrays human beings as fairly selfish people, but I think in some cases human beings, I think in general we are fairly selfish people, and there certainly has been more families that are having larger families, right? Which is wonderful to see. But I think in general, those families are seen as oddities. And Lorelai has her hand up, and I know she's part of a family that she can speak to this reality. Go ahead.
Are you calling us oddities?
I was going to say it, and then I'm like, no, I shouldn't say that. Go ahead, Lorelai.
So I have 7 living siblings, and I will admit money is a little, like,
Scarce.
it's thought of a little bit more, not scarce, but so like any family passes, they're generally made like 4 kids at most. So we can't even have 1 family pass. We have to have 2 family passes. Anytime we go on a trip, you have to multiply that by 10 people. But I don't think money may be an influencer, but I don't think it is, because the culture is not very pro-child either. Whenever we go out to places, people stare at us because there's so many of us, or they'll make comments like, are they all yours? Or how many are there? How do you keep track of all the names?
Do you run a daycare?
Daycare was one of them. And we were like, we're all different ages, and I'm 16. It was a while ago. So I think it's also, and I don't know what the stats are for Generation Z, and you may know these stats better, Michelle, but I know millennials are also not getting married as much, and I'm sure that's also a factor. I don't know if my mom could raise a large family without my dad. My dad is a very important part of our life and how our family works. So I imagine that's also a very scary idea to even go to be outnumbered, essentially, to go beyond 1 child and have to take care of 2 children, and you don't have a husband to help you.
Yeah. Millennials, you're right, are in general delaying marriage. And when they do get married, they're having dogs and cats rather than babies. And again, that speaks to the tendency for us to serve self, right? Because a child is a lifelong commitment. A dog or a cat might be a 7 to 10 year commitment, right? And easily you can get someone to take care of that dog or cat so you can go do what you want to do, right? To travel or those sorts of things. And so, yeah, there is this trend, Lorelai, you're absolutely right. And I think that brings down the average and just affirms, maybe money does play a role in it, right? I want more money to do the things that I want to do, but ultimately I think it is, in many cases, convenience. Kids take a lot of your time, and they are so worth it, right? Kids require sacrifice, and they are so worth it. But when we live in a society that gives instant gratification, provides instant gratification, and seeks to serve self, it's really hard to convince someone that a child is worth the time, the money, the effort, right?
And a dog or cat, that doesn't hurt your job position. That's another thing you want for money. Lots of times, one of the reasons they delay marriage is because they want to pursue their career or use the degree they work so hard to earn the money so that they can feel like they can support the children. But I mean, in reality, God's going to provide for that family no matter what. So there's a lot of trust with having children in general. Even if you don't have children, just trusting that God is going to provide for your family. And so if he blesses you with many children, he's not going to leave you hanging. That's
right.
for sure.
He will provide the food for the mouths that he blesses you with, right? there is an interesting trend in Gen Z, and we don't know exactly if it will continue in this way, but we are seeing more and more Gen Zers get married younger and actually get married, right? So that's kind of exciting. Some Gen Zers are waiting a long time and they're cohabiting, but there's a lot of Gen Zers that are getting married, and they're getting married young. Much like maybe their grandparents or great grandparents did, so that like in college, but even before graduation. So that's an interesting trend to kind of keep an eye on too, because Gen Zers usually, if they're getting married, it is not a surprise within a year they also have a baby. So there seems to be this change in valuing life and valuing the unborn, and that's really interesting, because millennials are very pro-life, so are Gen Zers. So it'll be just interesting to see as Gen Zers continue to grow up what they choose to do.
I think it's a really cool trend, and like anything, I think it can become an idol. I think large families can become an idol, and we can almost judge families that have one kid. We don't know their story. We don't know what they've suffered with, and so like with anything, we have to use discernment and make sure we're not pointing fingers at anyone. But I think particularly Gen Z's reaction, it is a reaction in a way of, we've seen this like dating apps and hookup culture and people just kind of treating their bodies as disposable, and we think, I want something more. And so I've noticed from myself in my own relationship and my friends that are in relationships, we're having very serious conversations very quickly, because we recognize how serious things can get if they go wrong. And also that I think our generation in general, and even other generations, is experiencing a loneliness epidemic. Almost 75% of people have less than one close friend. And so the idea of family, some my closest friends are in my family. And so we see the benefit of family, not just for continuing the generation, but for companionship and sharing our emotions with and growing alongside spiritually. So we want that. We end up dating people that become our friends too, which I think is really helpful in comparison to this idea of just find someone that you're extremely attracted to and that's where the bill ends.
Well, it is actually one of the keys to success, right? Is to have that friendship first, and not to marry someone that you're just attracted to, right? But that you have something foundational to build on, that common faith, that friendship. So yeah, I mean, both of my boys are in Gen Z, and their number one goal, get married, right? Get married, and my oldest is already married and got married his senior year of college. It's good to see, right? This desire for marriage, for family, and that companionship is a key part of it. I think you're right, Anna.
Yeah, so we've kind of covered all of my other questions. I guess the last one that I just want to wrap up my section with is how can we support and encourage couples who desire to have a large family? Because I think it is important that they know they are supported and they have the encouragement from others, even if the people supporting them don't have large families themselves.
Should we ask the oddities?
Yeah, I want to know from the large family kids, how can we best support and encourage families?
My mom would probably be a better I'm not gonna make it if you laugh, would probably be a better answer to that. Well, I think one, celebrate children. Like, yes, we do know how these children are coming along, I promise. So don't make that comment, and I don't know, just encourage that. It'd be really nice if we could all go to the zoo on one family pass, but I know none of you can change that.
What? Yes.
Any ideas? Not yes. Any ideas for that? Because those are just the top ones right now.
Yeah, and just not having it like rare, like, oh wow, kids, what are those? Like, I don't know, it'd be like just
Well, we are a
Like-
little overwhelming when we come in.
Yeah,
so
but, like-
I don't fully blame the stairs, but
Here, have you
It's
ever
like after
gone
it
to
gets
like
into-
a pure Catholic town?
we've
It would be
been-
nice if everywhere was like that. Like everyone had like a family of
Yeah,
like
but not
10
everybody's
kids.
able to do that. So
No. We do have some families at our church that, you know, are much larger. And I think one of the things that they find very valuable is that the congregation really has welcomed them and helped out, right? So when you have lots of little kids, you know, just helping out at church, even adopting in some ways, like as a grandparent, just to check in with the kids, helping them. You know, you mentioned the pass. You've got to have 2 passes to go to the zoo, right? Again, that is a financial strain. And so one of the ways that we try to help is when we do have an activity that's going to cost, sometimes members in our congregation that don't even have kids say, hey, I want to sponsor one of these kids, right? And help them get to Y4Life in Washington, D.C., or get to a service project over the summer, or those sorts of things. So offering scholarships for families with lots of kids so that they can still participate in those life affirming and faith affirming events. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't have kids. I'm not married. My family has 3 children, so not technically a large family. My grandma's one of 7, so I have a lot of cousins. I think just practicing how to talk about it with people. I know girls always talk about like, oh, I want to have this amount of kids. I want to have this amount of kids. Like, obviously that's totally up to God, but I'll say, oh, you know, I'd be open to having a large family. And sometimes there's a shock of like, oh, wow. And especially when you mention it to boys, they're like, you want more than 4 kids? Like, it's like, whoa, what are you going to do with all those babies? Love them, take care of them, parent them. I mean, like, it's kind of simple and complicated at the same time. But practice having a conversation of why are large families not a burden, and look at history. Is this a recent thing that people just have one child or desire one child? I also think part of this could be that Gen Z is, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but Gen Z is, a lot of the women are waking up that they don't want to be on birth control. So that also does change the discussion of, you know, are we going to completely control how many children we have, or are we going to kind of give that desire to God?
Yeah, that is an interesting phenomenon, and probably we should save that for like an entire session on chats. But ultimately, what we want to affirm is that every child is a gift, right? And that's what God's word says. God's word says children are gifts, big families are gifts, small families are gifts. Whatever size God gives, that is a gift, right? And it's true. There's not one size that fits every family. Some families are made for those kids, 10 kids, right? Or 12 kids. And sometimes some families are not made for that. They can't do that, whether it's physical health or mental health, or, you know, a variety of things. So I know we didn't get to my article, but I do want to just share with you. We kind of touched on some genetic things. So there's this really good song out there right now. It's called He's Different. And it's by, let's see if I can say his name correctly, Jean-Paul van Arx, maybe A-R-X. But he wrote a song about his little brother who was born with Down syndrome. And we'll put the link to the article in the podcast too, so you guys can take a look at that. But you should know Down syndrome children are gifts as well. They have some struggles, and yet we know that in general, when you ask someone who has Down syndrome or a family who has a Down syndrome child, whether their lives are filled with joy, you will hear a resounding yes, right? Even though many parents, when they first hear that news, are saddened by it, and some pursue an abortion, we know that those that carry on that pregnancy, God gives them much joy through the lives of their children. So I think the song really embraces that joy. in the ways that his brother is different, and that difference is a blessing to their family. So if you have a chance to listen to it, I'd encourage you to do so. Thanks so much for joining us at Chats for Life tonight, especially those of you who hung out a little bit longer than normal. And we hope to welcome you back next week. We'll all stick around for any questions that you guys have, but otherwise, have a great night. Thanks for joining us for today's life topic. Check out Y4Life.org or email Michelle at Y4Life.org to find out how and when you can go live with us at our next Chats for Life session. Or join us next time, right here at Y4Life Podcasts, where youth learn how to be gospel-motivated voices for life.